Hospital workers, serious, what regrets do you hear from dying patients? I work in a hospital. Whenever someone is at the end of their life, they always just want to be with their loved ones. Any regrets I've heard is always family related. They wanted more time with the people they love. Most people are at peace with things though. People also tend to wish they took their health seriously. I read an essay by a dying woman once. I remember the lines. I want more time with Jason, her husband. I want more time with my kids. She was 51 when she wrote this and died. Her kids were in college or just passed. She'd been married about half her life and her husband was about the same age. So a young widower. What you said just reminded me of that. Everyone wants what they can't have. Time. I was a hospice nurse. One of my elderly patients had skin cancer. A huge malignant melanoma on the side of his neck that was growing rapidly. He had been a farmer all his life and never married. One night we were talking and I asked him if there was anything he wished he had done differently in his life. And he thought about it a minute and said he wished he had worn a hat when he was farming. I wish he did too. I knew a farmer who died from melanoma. I wonder if that's disproportionately common in farmers. Edit. Cursory research indicates it is not. If you have research that it is, please link. My mom did home health and hospice. My stepdad was very abusive and my mom would take me to work with her to try and protect me. She didn't want to leave him due to religious beliefs. That's a different story. There was an old man. I'd play cards with him. We'd talk about working on the farm we had. He was a nice guy. He figured out I was being physically abused. His health started declining and he couldn't play cards or get out of bed. The last time I saw him, he said he was sorry he wasn't younger and that he couldn't help me. Almost 25 years ago and I still remember him. I remember of this 40-year-old patient that I had was dying from breast cancer that spread throughout her body. She was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years earlier and had a mastectomy. The doctor recommended for her to have a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction due to high risk of recurrence of cancer. She said that she wanted to keep her breast, a real breast rather than an implant, in case she remarries and will be somewhat whole. She regretted not getting the bilateral mastectomy. If she did, she would not gotten cancer in her remaining breast and dying at such a young age. The patient never ended up marrying after all. A week later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I instantly told the doctor that I want a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction. I also had an aggressive form of cancer. My doctor kept pushing a lumpectomy, which I probably would have gotten before I have heard how much she regretted her decision. I feel that she actually saved my life sharing and opening up with her regret of all time. Edit. Thank you all so much. I thought this would just get buried. I pray that the ones facing breast cancer will recover and my prayers are with you. You are not alone in this. I was 48 years old at the time of my diagnosis and have been cancer free for the 10 years now. I think of that lady often. She was a mother of 5. She was a true blessing to me. She was my last patient on my last shift prior to getting my results and starting chemo. If it wasn't for her, I know I would not be here. Edit. I had grade 3 HER2 breast cancer. I did training to be a CNA and we had to work in a nursing home as part of our training. I didn't really get into any deep conversations with the patients there. But I can say this. If you have family in a nursing home, please visit with them. It's a sad and lonely place to be. It really is. I'm doing my nursing school clinical in one right now and it's f***ing sad. On my shift yesterday, people asked me to translate for one resident who was agitated and crying in Portuguese. No one could understand her. I went to her room and asked her what she needs. She said she wants to go to bed and sleep. She's alone. Doesn't have a husband. And her kids forgot about her. It's just sad. I'm all alone, she said with tears in her eyes. Please visit your family if they're in a nursing home. AEMT here. Most patients that I see in my ambulance are too sick to talk in these cases, but one sticks with me. Mid-40s male called us for chest pain, put a 12 lead on and he was in the middle of a massive heart attack. For those that know the term, he was throwing tombstones. Sad part was he had medical training, so he knew that it wasn't good. We were screaming to the hospital. He looked me dead in the eye and goes, "I should have ate that F cake." When I asked what he meant, he told me, "F what others think. If it makes you happy, do it. Eat the cake. Pet a squirrel. Take a nap. F anyone else, it doesn't matter." He crashed shortly after we got to her. Didn't come back. Now at least if I want to do something purely for the fun of it and my wife asks why I want to, all I have to say is I want to pet the squirrel. In the ER, it's not something most people see coming when they arrive, but it's usually the same regret when they are coherent. They all wish their family was there, which sucks even more lately with COVID since family can't come in initially. Or they cry out for their so in a panic. It's gotten to the point recently where we tell them so is right here with you. The look of relief on people's faces just hearing that gets me every time. People just want to not be alone at the end. In a confession subreddit, a dude confessed how he was with a man. During his last moments, he crashed his truck in the roadside. Op was behind him. Called the urgencies. As Op was waiting the ambulance. Even hearing it, the man asked after his wife, where she was, that he wanted to see her. Op tried to comfort it the best he could, saying she was on her way. The man died when the ambulance arrived. Sometimes after, Op looked after this man. On social networks, he found out that this man's wife was already passed, and that he said to the man that his late wife was on her way. I've worked in long-term care for over a decade. I can't speak for the young, but most often old people regret the things they didn't do. I'm really grateful for YouTube because I came across the hospice part of the site and saw this regret over and over again. I'm only 25 and their words of regret have literally shaped my life since about 20 years old. I've proposed to a guy I love, rejected. Banged a New York City runway model. Called my boss a fattest dickhead. Moved cities because of their advice to go for it. Thanks old folks. At least when I'm in your bed I can always say that I tried it. You'll open up an adventure for me and I'm so grateful. A little different, but I worked in a G lab and we had a much older man, late 70s, probably maybe late 80s. It's been a while. Come in for G issues. While doing the procedure we found cancer and it was a death sentence. Super bad, and I think he had refused to have a colonoscopy up until this point. The doc said it was horrific, we couldn't get past the cancer, it was so bad. He said maybe a few months. We finish up and I am at bedside with the patient and doc comes in to talk and family wouldn't believe it. The guy wouldn't believe it. The doc backed down and not once told him how bad it actually was. I was pretty upset because doc basically lied to the family and gave them false hope because they wouldn't stop arguing and he just didn't care to tell them the truth. I still wonder often about what happened to him. If he spent his last days fighting it and wearing himself out, or if let himself enjoy his last few months. Colon cancer is horrific. It looks exactly like the word cancer. It's disgusting. It looks alien. Please 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 people, get your colonoscopy when you are told. It's not just you are saving, it's your kids who will get screening earlier if they find something in you. But if you don't, they'll never know they are at risk. I worked as an oncology nurse right out of nursing school. I was barely 21 years old. Had a patient about my age who was dying of lung cancer. A few hours before he died I sat with him and he was telling me how much he wished that he would have had more time to maybe fall in love, marry, have kids. He was so young. He asked me to call his parents and he died shortly after they arrived. It was awful. His regrets were more about the life not lived. Many older patients had some interesting life stories and most wanted to tell them before they died. Most were at peace with the life they lived. Many regretted working so much and not spending enough time with family. That's why I really like the curious case of Benjamin Button. Our capitalist life sucks. We study to get a job to mainly have a roof and food. For 40 years. Then when supposedly you have money and want to enjoy life is already too late. You're old, tired and maybe even sick. It would be great to go to school for a few. Get some education. Everyone gets a nice hefty loan. You enjoy it in your 20s. Enjoy your kids if you have any. By the time you are 50 you get a job and start paying for your loan. At that age and time OFN your life. You can be at the office for hours and maybe have nothing better to do. You already enjoy life. My mother-in-law. Her husband. Stepdad to my husband. Would not leave her alone in the hospital for 1 minute. He is a controlling, crazy man. My husband was visiting and somehow she convinced his scrap dad to go take a break. She pulled my husband, her son, close and said, "I don't want to be kept alive on machines." Her husband was her power of attorney, so my husband had no power. She was kept alive way longer than needed. I think, in the end, she regretted trusting him. Paramedic but close enough. Made a run on a woman in her 30s for shortness of breath. Her and her boyfriend had just moved into an apartment together. They were fighting over something trivial. Which room to unpack first or something. He thought she was just being dramatic. We transported. She never made it. Went from awake and talking to unresponsive and asystolic, no cardiac activity, in a matter of seconds. They were so caught up in a little argument that they never said goodbye. They never told each other they loved them. She didn't have any last words. And honestly that's even worse. He wished he had been a better father to his daughter. He wished they had reconnected. His dementia prevented him from remembering they had reconnected years before and that she visited often. I wish I could have made him aware that he had accomplished his last wish. But he died not really understanding that. End of life physician here. CPR. No, seriously, hear me out. Imagine using your hands to crush the sternum down 2 inches repeatedly of your 90-year-old grandmother who weighs 90 pounds. So that maybe you can then put her on a ventilator from which she might never get off alive. We ask this of everyone who comes into the hospital, but too often it's asked more like, hey, if you're drowning, do you want us to save you? Rather than what it truly is, especially for those who most likely won't survive it in the first place, and if they do will be significantly worse off than they were before they died. The survival statistics for patients with 1-2 significant comorbidities with an in-hospital cardiac arrest is like 5% to leave alive, and then 30-day survival is 5% of that original 5%, if I remember correctly. I cannot count the number of times families were adamant on having it done to their loved one only to then see what it entails firsthand and beg us not to do it again. My mom was an alcoholic who was 15 years sober when she died of cancer last year. She regretted quitting drinking. Open bracket. Sorry the other guy was a DCK to you. That's awful about your mom. Despite what she said. I hope those 15 years were better because the drink was gone. Or at least better for you to remember her by. I was a new nurse. Flying solo. We got a call for an incoming trauma. Woman in her 50s involved in a multi-car accident. We were already at the ambulance bay. Unsure of the woman's complete condition. She rolled in breathing on her own. But very labored with asymmetrical chest expansion. She was profusely bleeding. Had multiple deep lacerations. Pupils blown. Debris covering most of her. Etc. Her vitals were unstable. She was circling the drain. We knew she was on the verge of coding. I was standing near her head. Ready to assist in supporting her airway but also providing comfort and doing my best to calm her. The woman looked me directly in the eyes and in a hoarse, labored voice stated, "I was angry." I told her I was disappointed in her. She began to cry. Her vitals plummeted. "I'm sorry," was the last thing she said before her heart stopped. We coded her. Intubated her. Performed round after round of ACLS. Only to eventually have to call time of death. I still see her face at times. Her eyes filled with more emotional pain than physical. It took much longer and was so much harder to write this than I thought it would be. My grandmother used to be a nurse and she would say, "I've seen a lot of people through their last days and heard a lot of regrets. But I have never heard anyone coming up to the end wishing they had spent more time working." Double quote. I remind people about this by saying with a straight face on my deathbed, the one thing I don't want to regret is that I didn't work hard enough and make enough money. It's the most important thing to take care of first. There's always the look of confusion and it seems to hit home every time, leading up to some introspection on their own priorities. I worked in hospice. Top regret was not spending time with family and or lost time due to a family feud. Probably number 2 was wasting their life with their spouse, for various reasons, when they could have possibly been with someone they loved, met a soulmate. Number 3 was usually not accomplishing a bucket list item such as living in a foreign country. We were not supposed to let people bring their pets in to say goodbye. Other people could have allergies or an untrained pet could poop somewhere. But I always told family members to smuggle in Fluffy in an oversized purse, Paris Hilton style. Large dogs were harder, but since they were literally emotional support animals at the time, I never told them to leave. Edit. Thank you, fellow Redditor, for my first ever award. And thank you for my second award. WTF. 3 awards. I don't deserve this. Thank you so much. Please just thank your healthcare provider that is working with your loved one. Honestly, nothing meant more to me than a hug from someone. I don't know what to make of this, but I worked patient transportation for about 4 years, so I got to encounter a lot of people. The number 1 thing I always heard was don't get old. It felt like I'd hear it at least a few times a week, if not more often. I won't say much more, but hearing that from dozens of different people with different backgrounds who all end up in the same situation, it makes ya think. Not sure it belongs here, but I'll vent anyway. Both grandparents passed within a month and a half of each other earlier this year, likely due to COVID related issues. It was pretty difficult. My mom FaceTimed me crying in my nana's final days because my nana was asking her to get me on the phone. Nana was thinking she was drowning and no one would get her out of there, that mom wouldn't listen to her. There was obviously no water in the hospital, and she was on like the 6th floor. But she kept pleading for me to get her out. Mom crying hysterically. I had to tell Nana I took care of it and the water is no longer in there. She took a big sigh of relief. Thanked me for doing it. She said her arms felt like they were about to rip off because she was holding on so tight to stay afloat. I told her she can rest now, that it's all been taken care of. Told her how much I love her, how much we all love her, but encouraged her to rest up. Apparently she'd been hysterical for some hours, which is exhausting. She started resting. Fucking sucks. Tearing up as I write this. The f-king circle of life, man. It can be wretched and wrought with pain. Just sucks. And it really sucks that living in a different city, 4 hours driving distance, that I would have but couldn't be there due to COVID. For either one of them in their last days. Especially knowing that we, their grandkids, were their whole light of life. R.I.P. Nana and Granddad. I worked with a man in his late 30s with pancreatic cancer. He had worked long hours so he could retire early. He had a young family and never got to see his kids grow up. I've also lost my birth dad and stepdad to cancer. Both worked their asses off, saving their travel plans for retirement. Neither of them lived to see those dreams realized. When I got engaged, my stepdad was thrilled to become a grandpa. He wasn't alive by the time my son was born. That her son wouldn't put her out of her misery. She only said it once, but I hope I'll have the opportunity to be a euthanasia nurse one of these days. The way we are forced drag out death for those who are of sound mind and in unbearable pain is f-king cruel. We just put down our cat because she couldn't be saved. But my grandmother was put through so many medical procedures to save her. I wasn't there near the end. She lived far away. I had a baby, but I'm guessing she would have been okay to leave gently before they put her through surgery for her broken hip. I work in long-term care. Majority male. A lot of the men regret their marriage. Also, one patient had a psychotic breakdown in his 50s. He's in his mid-70s hospice now and says his entire family haven't talked to him since. All he knows is words were said and I burned all my bridges. Double quote. Happy things happen too. Weird. I work in probate and nearly all the widowers get remarried ASAP. Especially the older ones. The widows can take remarriage or leave it for the most part. And many do leave it behind. But most of the men consider themselves on the market again almost immediately. One nearly 100-year-old guy had a 70+ year marriage when his wife passed and was looking for a new wife not 2 months later, much to the distress of his children. I never heard a specific spoken regret, but when my dad was fighting stage 4 lung cancer, his whole attitude changed. We spoke so often. I'd moved across country and we'd never truly been close before. But he called every couple of days. He asked so many questions about my life. He told me he was proud of me. He was so proud of me and my brother and my sister. He was proud of the risk I took packing up my life and moving to Texas. He passed away 2 days after that conversation. None of us saw it coming. Projections were that he had another 6 months minimum and the chemo was going well. But looking back, I think he knew. I miss him so damn much. I think we both regretted not simply being closer. Edit. Fixed a word. There was an article that talked about this, and after collecting a bunch of answers they found 5 that stood out. 1. Don't ignore your dreams. 2. Don't work too much. 3. Say what you think. 4. Cultivate friendships. 5. Be happy. I have it on my bookmark. My uncle lost against AML in February. He promised me we would go hiking sometime a week earlier. Before I even knew he had no chance of recovery. I heard later from my parents he regretted not being able to do that with me. We were close. So I took it really hard. Edit. Some details and formatting. Not yet. I can't die yet. I still have so much growing to do. I want to see my children and grandchildren grow up. Double quote. I am a physician trainee who has done a decent amount of palliative care. I have been privileged to hear many stories and be part of many deaths. But I still can't explain why it is that certain lines remain with me and hit me so much harder. The gentleman who told me the line above was in his late 60s, early 70s. It made me reflect on how I view patients in this age group. Yes. Much older than myself. But still with growing and living to do. I also think of a woman in her 50s I met early on in my training. She and her female partner had never married, partly due to laws. Partly because it had never seemed important. When she was diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer, they regretted never making that step. I attended their small wedding in the hospital. She died a few days later. He was one of my first patients as a nursing student. Named Frank. He was 92. After knowing him a few days, he disclosed to me his regret was outliving everyone he loved. That he and his wife hadn't had kids. And he was all that was left and that he wanted to see his wife again. I wasn't sure how to respond. So I just listened. And it made me realize how living so long isn't great if everyone you love is gone. He passed away later that week. And while I distinctly recall some of my classmates being upset, I felt relief for him. I knew he was where he wanted to be. I've had many patients since. But you tend to remember your first ones. Other than that, ditto what everyone's saying. More time with family, loved ones. Wish they wasted less time with work or other bullshit, etc. This was a weird one for me and actually apropos for my current life. I still think about her. Happened maybe 6-7 years ago. Older 70s female with HX of breast cancer. In IQ for sepsis, I believe. I talked to her and she mentioned she was widowed. I gave my condolences and stated that's hard. I'm sorry about your loss. I imagine you miss him. To my surprise she told me no. Actually I don't. I was relieved when he died. I was never happy with him. I didn't leave him because that's not what we did back in the day. So here I wasted many years with a man who didn't treat me well. And now I have cancer. Double quote. Oof. Life lesson, folks. I've been a nurse for 14 years. The one thing that still hits me is a 14-year-old boy fighting cancer. Did the transplant but died fighting the side effects of that transplant. I've nursed him for almost a year and we have grown very close. The day he went away to his home country in the US, I told him I am his big mama, and when he returned, we would be together doing many plans. His dream was to be a doctor. So I told him I would quit my job and be his nurse the moment he becomes a doctor. On the night before he and his family left, my husband, chef, cooked for the family and all the nurses his favorite foods. My husband taught my patient on how to cook the recipes. My patient also loves to cook. We had dinner together and I was crying my eyes out afterwards. He is like a second son to me. His last words to me are, "I will make sure to meet you again." The day I found out from his mother he had passed away, I was devastated.